Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our preview of the Sedgwick Brand Protection Recall Index for the second quarter of 2024. Presenting with me today are my colleagues Amy Hord and Matt Walker. I do want to say we have over 1,500 global registrations from 85 different countries for today's webinar and in combination with tomorrow's European webinar as well. So great numbers. Amy and Matt, can you believe we've completed the first half of 2024 already?
Yeah, Chris, it's pretty unbelievable. It feels like just yesterday we were doing the State of the Nation report. I'm betting the third quarter, I think it's probably going to go out just as fast. But Amy, what do you think about being halfway through the year?
Yeah, Matt, time is definitely flying by. And as we'll share with everyone today, U.S. regulators have been quite busy. Before we dive into today's presentation, we would like to thank our partners who will share their insights about regulatory trends across the industries we cover in the Recall Index. You'll hear from them a bit later.
Yeah, so the Q2 2024 U.S. Sedgwick Brand Protection Recall Index will be released tomorrow. The full report offers more details about product recalls from the second quarter of the year, as well as a preview of the July 2024 numbers. It also offers expert views on regulatory changes that will impact businesses in the coming months. Amy, do you want to talk about the industries we cover?
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. I'd be glad to. The index looks at 5 industries from a U.S. angle: automotive, consumer product, food and drink, pharmaceutical, and medical device. We review data collected from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, or CPSC, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, and the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA.
Just a reminder, Sedgwick does also publish a European edition of our Recall Index. So our EU and UK colleagues, they will be hosting a webinar tomorrow to review that data. The European Index will be released after the webinar. We encourage you all to attend tomorrow's webinar to see what companies operating in the UK and EU should know, because we do know that the changes in the UK and EU will impact US business operations. To register, you can simply scan the QR code that's on the screen now, or you can use that short URL that's presented. Do note, though, the URL is case sensitive. At the same time, if you would like, you can also drop a request in the chat and we'll send you a link. In addition to the European and US editions of the Recall Index, we have also just published the Product Safety Pulse Report. This is going to be based upon a survey of more than 2,000 European and North American consumers, and it's an industry-first report that reveals key attitudes and behaviors towards product safety, recall events, and can help to discover what truly motivates consumers to respond to recalls, why a quarter of consumers knowingly buy, sell, or donate recall products on secondhand markets, and also what you can do to improve your recall effectiveness while maintaining regulatory compliance. To download, you can scan the QR code that's on the screen or use that short URL. Now I'll turn things over to Chris.
All right, thank you, Matt. So the overall number of U.S. recalls decreased to 788 events in Q2 compared to 909 events in Q1 of this year. Every single sector had fewer recalls this quarter than the last. The half-year totals are lower as well. So there were just shy of 1,700 recalls in the first half of 2024 compared to 1,719 events in the first half of 2023. Now, however, for context, the first half of 2023 represents the highest numbers of events recorded in the first 6 months over the past 5 years. Now, given that, the first half of 2024 is just 1.3% below this figure. So it is possible that 24 could become a record-breaking year for U.S. recalls. In contrast, the number of units recalled across all 5 of the industries covered increased from 129.6 million units in Q1 to 254.6 million in Q2, so a nice spike. While only medical device and consumer products saw a higher number of units impacted this quarter, the gains in those sectors were significant. The volume of medical device units impacted rose 267% quarter over quarter, so from 53.4 million units in Q1 to 196 million in Q2. And while consumer products rose 67%, that's a big number too, from 23.4 million to 39.1 million. However, the total number of units recalled across all the industries we track was lower in the first half of 2024 than last year. There were 384.2 million units recalled in the first half of 2024 compared to 439.6 million units impacted in the first half of last year. All right, Matt, what else was going around the market sectors?
Yeah, so artificial intelligence, or AI, it remains a focus for regulators across industries. So the second quarter saw efforts to ensure safe and transparent use of AI technologies in automotive, consumer products, as well as medical device sectors. Another cross-industry priority is ensuring that product labeling is honest. There were new rules and guidances around labeling food and drink and pharmaceutical products. And we also saw a fine of nearly $3.2 million against a consumer product manufacturer who mislabeled merchandise as made in the USA. We've seen a rise in groups taking action against regulatory agencies over new rules, or in some cases, the lack of rules. The FDA is facing lawsuits over its role on laboratory-developed tests and for not working quickly enough to enact a ban on menthol cigarettes. The second quarter also saw lawsuits alleging companies did not act quickly enough or take the right steps when products have been recalled. This includes both criminal and civil cases against companies and specific executives, as well as fines of more than $21 million. So, Amy, what have you observed?
Well, regulators are definitely increasing their monitoring of imported products across multiple sectors, from automotive and food and drink to consumer goods. They're also looking at the full product life cycle, from raw materials to the disposal of old goods. Stakeholders need to thoroughly vet foreign partners, be prepared for higher standards, and plan for how tariffs may impact their businesses. With the U.S. presidential elections and many congressional seats up for vote this fall, the focus of lawmakers may change if the administration or the balance of political power shifts. This will likely impact regulations moving forward and how quickly. That means more uncertainty for companies until the dust settles. Chris, should we take a closer look at each industry now?
Yes, so as far as today's agenda, we're going to begin with the automotive industry. That'll be followed by consumer products. After that, we're going to highlight data and trends in the food and drink industry. We'll move to medical devices, and we will round out finally with the pharmaceutical industry. We will take a break at the end of each industry section to take your questions and also to share some insights from some of our industry partners. If there is time, we'll also take questions at the very end. I will say you can enter the questions into the chat or Q&A module. Your lines are muted, but you can enter those questions into either of those modules, which we'll be looking at throughout the presentation. So at the start of each industry section, we will also ask a question to test your knowledge. You'll see a poll pop up on the right side of your screen where you can record your answer. You'll have about 20 seconds to submit your answer, but don't forget to hit the submit button. All right, Matt, can you start us with our first question in the auto industry?
Absolutely. So for those of you who haven't joined us previously, the questions are all multiple choice and everyone's answers are anonymous. So here's the first question. According to the New York Times, how many Chinese-made vehicles did a single Swedish automaker sell in the U.S. in the first quarter of 2024? Was the total A, 230,000, B, 2,200, C, 275, or D, 25,000? We'll give you the answer here in a bit.
All right, well, people are answering this. I did want to call out that even though Amy is joining Matt and I for the first time for this index webinar, Amy has been with us for nearly 30 years. So she's got a ton of recall experience, a ton of knowledge, and we definitely benefit from having her join us for this webinar. So with that, I think we've run out of time for the survey, so we'll get moving more into auto. So the Environmental Protection Agency's new emission rules for the model year 2027 light duty, medium duty, and heavy duty vehicles took effect back in June. The standards are designed to help slow the rate of climate change. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, moved ahead on a range of other safety issues in the second quarter. The agency published a final rule on automatic emergency braking and pedestrian automatic emergency braking in light vehicles, and these regulations will take effect for most vehicles in September of 2029. NHTSA also called for stakeholder input on regulations regarding safety standards for electric vehicles, or EVs. The changes would bring the U.S. more in line with global technical regulations on EV safety. Regulators in the auto industry are exploring how AI could impact transportation. The U.S. Department of Transportation's Advanced Research Projects Agency Infrastructure issued a request for information around using AI to improve transportation safety, efficiency, and accessibility. Also, in a move that could have a profound effect on the industry's supply chain, President Biden called for an increase on tariffs for Chinese imports, including steel, aluminum, semiconductors, electric vehicles, batteries, and critical minerals. The plan would raise the tariffs on Chinese-made EVs to 100% and increase the tariff on lithium EV batteries, battery parts manufactured in China to 25%. Also, some congressional leaders are calling for even more aggressive action against Chinese automotive imports, including a total ban. All right, so now let's get into the details on the automotive data. Amy.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. But first, let's take a look at the answer to our poll question. According to the New York Times, how many Chinese-made vehicles did a single Swedish automaker sell in the U.S. in the first quarter of 2024? It looks like this one might have stumped a few people. We had mostly answers of, looks like 230,000. However, the correct answer is B, 2,200. The president's new 100% tariff on EVs manufactured in China will certainly impact this company. The automaker already had plans to produce a new model in a South Carolina-based plant. Now let's look at the Q2 data. In Q2 of 2024, NHTSA issued 243 automobile recalls. This is a 7.3% decrease compared to Q1. The number of units fell by 60% from 12.45 million in Q1 to only 4.97 million in Q2. This is the second lowest quarter of units impacted since Q2 of 2013. The average recall size was also lower. It fell from 47,523 units in Q1 to just over 20,000 units this quarter. This is the second lowest average recall size in over 10 years. Despite the lower numbers in Q2, figures are still ahead of 2023 at the halfway point of the year. Halfway through 2023, there were 479 automobile recalls impacting 15.8 million vehicles. For the first half of this year, there have been 505 recalls with 17.42 million vehicles affected. In Q2 of this year, equipment was the leading cause of automobile recalls. It was linked to 42 events. Electrical systems was the second most common concern with 38, and steering was third with 20. Backover prevention systems was the most common reason for automobile recalls by volume in Q2 of this year. There were 1.6 million units impacted across 12 events. This was the only category that had a recall involving more than 1 million units. Electrical systems was second with 818,813 units affected, and powertrain systems was third with 577,947 units involved in the recall this quarter. Automobiles were the largest product category for recalls with 219 events in Q2 of this year. This is down from 232 last quarter. The equipment category had 20 recalls that impacted 235,000 plus units. There were 4 tire recalls, an increase from 1 last quarter. And for the second consecutive quarter, there were no recorded events for child seats in Q2.
Now, before we take questions, we do want to share insights from our partner. So we have John Curie with UL Solutions, who said, improving the safety of vehicles equipped with automated driving systems or autonomous vehicles is one of the greatest challenges faced by the automotive industry and regulators alike. Intuitively, it may seem like AVs are inherently safe because they are not subject to distraction, fatigue, and other frailties of human drivers, but the reality is far more complex. Safety measures can be divided into 3 primary categories: governance, design and process, and verification and validation. The necessity of a holistic approach to safety cannot be overemphasized. No matter how excellent a specific safety approach is, it may still be insufficient if it does not effectively implement the full breadth of necessary safety measures in the 3 key areas.
All right, thank you, Matt. So some good insights from John. Again, you can read more from the full article from John and UL Solutions within our published index report. So with that, we can open it up to take questions from the auto industry. So just a reminder to enter those into the chat or QA module. We'll just give a second for that. I do see a question related to the presentation materials being available post-webinar. So we'll absolutely provide the full index report out to you, which has all this data in it. If anyone does need or would like a copy of the slides too, I can make that available as well. So here's one. What kind of information is the Department of Transportation Advanced Research Project Agency infrastructure hoping to gain with its request for information? Amy or Matt, you want to try that?
Okay. Yeah, Chris, I can take that one. The agency is definitely exploring potential applications of AI across all modes of transportation. Also looking at the use of AI to deal with emerging issues such as the risks presented by that use of AI and potential barriers to the responsible adoption of the technology.
Thank you, Amy. I don't see any more questions coming in for the auto industry. So with that, Amy, do you want to dive into the consumer product industry?
Yep, thanks, Chris. Again, we will start with a question. In May, the U.S. government recommended prison sentences for 2 executives from a dehumidifier manufacturer. They were convicted of failing to report defects in their company's products. What was the length of the sentence? Was it A, 2 years, B, 5 years, C, 10 years, or D, 25 years? We'll give you a little bit of time to answer. Chris, while we're waiting on that, do you want to tell us a little bit about the upcoming IFPSO International event?
Yeah, so IFPSO, if you're in consumer product industry, the International Symposium will be in Brussels this year, right after the EU Product Safety Week. So I do recommend, and it may be more relative to tomorrow's webinar, which is on European recalls, but definitely a great opportunity if you sell products into Europe or the UK. I also did want to call out that the planning for the annual symposium, which is in February in Orlando, they have opened it up for proposals. So if you have something that you want to speak on or bring up, the time to enter those proposals is now. I think it goes until September 6th. So just a call out there, Amy.
Great. Thanks, Chris, for that intel. Now I'll turn things over to Matt.
Thanks, Amy. So the Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, they continue their aggressive stance on enforcing Made in USA violations. In April, the agency broke the record it had previously set in January for civil penalty amounts related to country of origin claims. A home products company was charged with listing multiple products as being made in the USA, when in fact they were made in China and other countries. The manufacturer agreed to pay a fine of nearly $3.2 million for this. In addition to enforcing existing rules, agencies are working on new regulations to mitigate risks from consumer products. In May, the CPSC announced its direct final rule to update safety standards for infant and cradle swings. The Commission is looking at improved requirements and standards for other children's products as well. As more and more manufacturers integrate AI into their consumer products, the National Institute of Standards and Technology is working on best practices to help identify synthetic content and differentiate between human and AI-created output. Chris?
Thanks, Matt. So again, before we get to the data, let's see the answer to the question that was asked. So in May, the U.S. government recommended prison sentences for 2 executives. What was the recommended length of their sentences? So it looks like the majority picked B, 44% said B, 5 years. The next majority was correct. So the answer is C, 10 years. Federal prosecutors also asked for a series of sentencing enhancement that could really add 3 years of supervised release and a criminal fine between $250,000 and $500,000. This was actually the first ever criminal prosecution for failure to report under the Consumer Product Safety Act. All right, so now on to the consumer product recall data. So in Q2, there were 86 CPSC recalls, and this is down 6.5% from the 92 events we saw in Q1. In contrast, and as I mentioned earlier, the number of units recalled increased 67%. It rose from 23.3 million in Q1 to 39 million in this past quarter. The average recall size also grew. It went from 250,000 in Q1 to 454,000 in Q2. This is the second highest average recall size we've seen in the last 6 years. The first half of 2024 had 8 more recalls than the first half of 2023, with 178 events. The number of units recalled in the first half of this year was also higher. There was 62.4 million this year compared to 43.7 million in the first half of 2023. Sports and recreation accounted for the most recalls by product category in Q2. It was linked to 25 recall events. Home furnishings and decor was second with 13, and children's products was third with 9 events. Now, in terms of units impacted, toys was the top product category. It had 22 million units recalled in Q2. And this was primarily driven by a hazardous risk from a liquid resin that was in toys. Personal care had 8.46 million units recalled, making it the second highest by volume. Most of the recalled personal care units were tied to a liquid laundry detergent packaging, and that could leak and pose a risk to children. Electronics was the third highest product category in Q2 with 3.91 million units being recalled. Fire was the top consumer product hazard by event in Q2. It was tied to 18 recalls, and this has been the leading risk for the past 5 quarters. It also was the third most common risk in terms of the number of units impacted with 2.5 million. Injuries was the second leading concern with 10 events, and it was followed by burns with 9 recalls. Hazardous materials was the top risk by unit as a result of the 22 million toys recalled due to the liquid resin I mentioned earlier. The leaking detergent risk made packaging the second highest concern by volume with 8.26 million units being recalled. The CPSC did not issue any fines in Q2. That kept the first half total for civil penalties at 16 million. Matt?
Yeah, so again, before we take questions, we'll share some insights, this time from our partner, Will Troutman, who's with Norton Rose Fulbright. So Will said, for several years following the implementation of the CPSIA testing and certification requirements and the sea change they brought, it seemed that consumer product companies knew what to expect, whether or not they liked it. But all signs point to increasing volatility, and that's before considering the coming presidential election. Compliance personnel need to increase their vigilance and anticipate change. To the extent the current state of internal compliance is unknown or unclear, now may be a good time to assess existing policies or formalize informal processes so that as and if compliance requirements change substantively, companies can be more responsive and adaptable.
All right, thank you, Matt. So always good intel from Will. Again, you can read more in the full article within our published index. So now we're going to take questions from the consumer product industry. So again, you can enter those into the chat or Q&A module. Question, are the fires specific to lithium-powered products? I think there are some lithium-powered products that were impacted in recalls in Q2. I think there was other fires that weren't necessarily related to the lithium batteries, whether it was cords or other mechanics within the products. But we can pull out some of that data just to see how many were related to lithium, which obviously, no pun intended, lithium ion is definitely the hot topic right now when it comes to fires and conducting recalls, but they can and have occurred from other means too, these fires. What did the executives hide? I'd have to go back and look at the specifics on this, but I do think it's related to just failure to report in a timely fashion a hazardous product, but I can go back and look at the specifics to that. Let's see. You said that Consumer Product Safety Commission issued a final direct rule on consumer safety standards for infant and cradle swings. What should companies do to ensure they are in compliance?
Yeah, Chris, I can take that one.
Okay.
So producers of infant and cradle swings, I think they definitely need to review the final rule just to ensure that their products are meeting the new standard. I know that might mean making changes to their design, as well as possibly even their testing methods. I think, though, that any manufacturer, manufacturer, distributor, or even a retailer of products that are for infants, they should expect strict scrutiny to continue from CPSC going forward.
Thank you, Matt. All right, we do have a comment about the link in the chat not working, so we'll take a peek at that. See, I don't see any specific consumer product ones. We'll circle back on an auto one that came in at the end. But with that, I think we'll move on to the food and drink sector. And I think we'll have, Amy, do you want to kick us off with our first question with food and beverage?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. So first, our question. In April, the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service announced that it would classify salmonella as an adulterant in certain types of raw chicken products. Since 1998, how many salmonella outbreaks has the agency and its public health partners investigated in this type of chicken product? Is it A, 52, B, 14, C, 26, or D, 200? Please make your choice now. So Matt, with all that discussion around salmonella and chicken, what are you planning for dinner tonight?
I think I'm going to have to talk with my wife. We did have chicken on the plans for tonight, but we may have to pivot to like a vegetarian meal or something, steer clear of that.
Yep, definitely. So, all right, Chris, do you want to talk about the trends in food and drink?
Sure thing. Thank you, Amy. All right, so on May 30th, the FDA announced that the Secretary of Health and Human Services had approved the agency's proposed reorganization plan to create a unified human foods program. The restructuring is designed to create a more effective, centralized management approach to food oversight and allow for swifter responses to emergencies. And this push to reorg the FDA came really as a result of the Reagan-Udall Foundation's independent evaluation of how the agency handled the infant formula crisis, which was back in 2022. Another initiative to protect infants and toddlers is the Baby Food Safety Act of 2024, which was introduced back in May. According to one of the bill's sponsors, the measure sets limits on the level of heavy metals in commercial infant and toddler food. It also increases sampling and testing standards in imported and domestic processed food and creates more transparency around the rate of FDA inspections for domestic and foreign food facilities. Also, in addition to being the target of the proposed bill, alleged heavy metal contamination is the focus of several lawsuits against a major discount retailer over lead-contaminated ground cinnamon and applesauce. These products were part of a series of recalls initiated last quarter. Also, more litigation may be on the way after a recent study by Consumer Reports found excessive levels of lead in some children's snacks. In addition, the FDA issued a warning letter in June to one of the primary US-based retailers of the tainted applesauce products. It claimed the company did not adequately remove the recalled merchandise. The agency also placed the foreign-based distributor and manufacturer of the apple cinnamon fruit pouches on multiple import alerts for increased screening. Also, like other agencies, the FDA is working to improve transparency in labeling. It has issued a final rule on what criteria meat, poultry, and egg products must meet to be labeled product of the USA. The rule includes considerations for lab-grown meat and poultry products. The FDA, USDA, and EPA have shared a plan for jointly developing regulations for modified plants and animals and other biotechnology products. By working together, the agencies hope to update current regulations and oversight and develop new rules to ensure the safety of these types of products. Matt?
Yeah, so the answer to our question in the latest food industry data. So since 1998, how many salmonella outbreaks have the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service and its public health partners investigated in the raw chicken product named in the agency's action? Looks like the audience overwhelming selection was for 200, which would have been my selection as well. But actually, the correct answer is B, 14 outbreaks and approximately 200 illnesses. Feeling a little bit more comfortable about chicken tonight now based on that. So, Amy, I'll turn things over to you here to talk about the FDA data.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. The number of FDA food recalls dropped by 11.9% in Q2 of this year compared to Q1. It fell to 118 events. The number of units impacted also fell by 68.5%. They went from 30.72 million units in Q1 to only 9.68 million in Q2. The average recall size fell from 229,240 units in Q1 to just under 82,000 this quarter. The first half of 2024 also fell way behind figures from the first half of 2023. The total number of recalls from the first half of 2023 was 270, compared to 252 in the first half of this year. The difference in units affected is greater, with 153.3 million in the first half of 2023, compared to only 40.40 million in the first half of this year. In Q2 of 2024, there were 41 recalls for undeclared allergens, continuing its streak as the leading cause of FDA food recalls. Wheat was the leading allergen, tied to 12 recalls. It was followed by milk with 11, and there were 3 recalls for undeclared sesame. Bacterial contamination was the second highest cause of FDA food recalls in terms of events. There were 37 recalls in Q2. This is up from 34 in Q1. Mislabeling was third with 11. By volume, bacterial contamination had the highest number of units recalled with 9 million. Undeclared allergens had the second most units recalled with 256,315. And non-bacterial contamination was third with 243,151 units across 3 events. Prepared foods had the most recalls of any product category in Q2 with 30 events. Dairy was the second with 16 events, and it was followed by flavorings with 15. 4 of the flavoring recalls were for lead contamination, and of those, 3 involved cinnamon and 1 was for mineral salt. In terms of units impacted, Salmonella led with 8.73 million, affecting all major product categories in Q2. Candies recorded the most units impacted with Salmonella with 4.40 million. Dairy was second with 3.51 million units impacted, and flavoring had just under 675,000 units. The number of Class 1 recalls in Q2 of this year dropped to 38 compared to 59 in Q1. The number of units impacted also fell from 3.6 million to 2.75 million quarter over quarter. The number of Class 2 recalls increased from 63 events in Q1 to 68 in Q2. The volume of impacted Class 2 units fell from 27.59 million to 6.74 million. And the number of Class 3 recalls held at 12 events. The number of units impacted rose from 63,968 to 184,814. There were 114 unique companies involved in an FDA recall in Q2. While the majority recorded a single event in the corner, 4 companies experienced 2 recalls and 1 company had 3. Chris, would you like to share the USDA data with us?
Sure thing. Thanks, Amy. So looking at USDA recall data in Q2 of this year, the number of USDA food recalls decreased by nearly 54%. So it fell from 13 events in Q1 to 6 recalls in Q2. This ties with Q1 2020 for the lowest number of USDA recalls in a single quarter in the past 12 years. The number of units dropped by a little over 64%, from 378,000 pounds last quarter to 135,000 pounds this quarter. Only 2 quarters in the past 10 years have recorded fewer pounds. The first half of 2024 had a lower number of both events and volume compared to the first half of 23. There were 28 recalls impacting 3.25 million pounds in the first half of 23. This compares to only 19 recalls affecting 513,000 plus pounds in the first half of 2024. Pork and beef had 2 recalls each in Q2. Egg and multiple meats were involved in 1 USDA recall apiece. The top reason for USDA recalls by event was the combination of misbranding and undeclared allergens with 3 events. No import reinspection was linked to 2 recalls, and bacterial contamination, specifically E. coli, was tied to 1 event. By unit count, no import reinspection was the leading cause of USDA food recalls. It impacted 106,000 plus pounds, And then bacterial contamination was second, linked to 16,000 plus pounds of product being recalled. Pork was responsible for the most units recalled by product category in Q2, with 86,000 plus pounds being recalled. Beef was second with 36,000 plus pounds, and multiple meats, which I'm still not certain what exactly that is, but multiple meats was third with 8,200 pounds being impacted. Matt?
Yeah, so for the food and drink, we'll share some insights here from our partners, Rachel Ward and Taryn Hoare, who are with Exponent. So they said food allergies are not going away. The management of this critical food safety element is going to become more complex as lists of allergens requiring mandatory labeling and lists of exemptions to labeling lengthen and diversify across various global markets. Food businesses need to educate their supply chains about specific individual market needs. Companies should follow a consistent approach to gather allergen information from their suppliers and delivering it to their customers. This will minimize confusion, avoid mistakes, and optimize efficiencies in information transfer and risk mitigation.
All right, thank you, Matt. Some good intel from the Exponent team. Again, you can read more within the index. So now we are going to open it up to questions for this industry. So we'll give a second to enter those in. I did see a couple questions coming in, so we will try to put the QR code that we had up, I think, for the European webinar. We'll try to put that up along with the Pulse one towards the end of this presentation. There is a question related to, seems like I'm reading more about food and beverage recalls this summer. Based on the data, they are down, but just in general, food and beverage recalls tend to make the news. They have a broad consumer base. A lot of times, though, even though this quarter Class 1 recalls were down, they tend to make the news with different press releases, tend to get the attention of consumers as well. There's, I think, maybe a little over 13 recalls that are going to get announced daily across all of the industries, but sometimes the food and beverage make the news just in general to consumer consumption, et cetera, and people can pay more attention to them. Let's see, here's now that the USDA considers salmonella an adulterant, will producers have to destroy products that test positive for bacteria? I can take that one. So I think the answer is no, because specific products are raw and salmonella is killed by cooking. So lots that test positive for salmonella that are above the allowable thresholds can still be used in fully cooked applications or raw products that would be cooked by consumers. So I think the poultry producers and processors of these products should, though, take the opportunity to reassess their their hazard analysis, their critical control point plans as well, to see what now may need to apply. So taking that into account as well. What's driving the decline in recalls, reduced oversight by the agencies, or improved industry standards? I think across food and beverage, there are definitely some improved standards, practices, prevention that may be reducing some recalls. But as we know, quarter over quarter, it can be lumpy. So in Q3, we might see a spike in food and beverage recalls. And that's normal annually to see that up and down. I do think companies are doing better jobs with their safety programs, their hazard analysis, their food safety defense programs, their communication, finding issues before they actually occur as well. So I do think there's definitely some better advancements in food safety that may reduce product recalls, but we still see them occurring. I think there's a question that I saw. Let's see. A couple more data related questions. So we'll circle back on some of these other questions. But in the interest of time, I think we'll move on to the next industry, which is on medical devices. So again, we're going to test your knowledge with a question. So in May, the American Clinical Laboratory Association and one of its member companies sued the FDA over a final rule. What is the focus of that rule? Is it A, cybersecurity requirements for medical devices, B, the FDA's authority to regulate laboratory developed tests, or C, penalties for violating the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So please go ahead and make your selection now.
Yeah, Chris, I'll say I think that we were a little tricky here with this one. Normally when we do a question, I think we have a little bit more of a lead in, but I will call out for our listeners that if they were paying close attention during the initial piece, we actually provided the answer then. So this is kind of a test to see how well is everyone following and how closely were they listening at the beginning piece.
Yep, good point, Matt. We'll have to see how this played out. All right. With that, Matt, can you give us some insights from the medical device trends we're seeing?
Absolutely. So the U.S. Department of Justice, or DOJ, announced 2 significant settlements concerning medical device manufacturers in the second quarter. In April, a manufacturer of CPAP machines, BiPAP machines, and mechanical ventilators was ordered to stop manufacturing most sleep and respiratory devices at 3 Pennsylvania facilities. The company was also instructed to stop distributing these devices from its U.S. facilities until it had met specific measures designed to increase device safety and ensure products comply with the requirements in the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. In addition, the company must implement a recall remediation plan to ensure patients impacted by a June 2021 recall of certain products are made whole. In a criminal case against another medical device manufacturer, the DOJ found the company had concealed a device malfunction that resulted in inaccurately low readings for lead tests. This error potentially impacted tens of thousands of children and other patients. According to the settlement, the company will plead guilty to violations of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and will also pay a $21.8 million fine, $10.9 million in forfeiture, and a minimum of $9.3 million to compensate patient victims. The manufacturer entered into a deferred prosecution agreement to resolve felony conspiracy fraud charges against the company as part of that ruling. The Federal Trade Commission is also taking enforcement actions against device manufacturers. It challenged more than 300 patents listed in FDA's Orange Book through a series of warning letters. The agency claims companies are providing inaccurate information in an attempt to keep generic products off the market, as well as inflate prices for brand name devices. The FDA found itself in legal trouble of its own after stakeholders sued the agency over its new final rule regulating laboratory developed tests. This goes back to our question that we just actually brought up. So the FDA claims the rule will ensure the tests are safe and effective. Meanwhile, opponents say the new oversights will make it harder for patients to access essential care. Like several other agencies, the FDA continues to move forward with regulating the use of AI. The Centers for Biologics Evaluation and Research, Drug Evaluation and Research, and Devices and Radiological Health, along with the Office of Combination Products, published a collaborative plan to ensure that AI is used responsibly and ethically to create safe and effective medical products. Amy, do you want to give the answer to our question and then also share the medical device data?
Yes, thanks, Matt. So reminder on the question, in May, the American Clinical Laboratory Association and one of its member companies sued the FDA over a final rule. What was the focus of the rule? So it does look like several of you were paying attention and took advantage of those notes earlier. The answer is B, the FDA's authority to regulate laboratory developed tests. The plaintiffs claimed the rule overstepped the agency's legal authority and that the FDA acted arbitrarily and randomly. They are asking for a judgment that the FDA cannot legally regulate laboratory development tests and to vacate that final rule. Now to the data, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. So in Q2, the number of medical device recalls decreased by a little over 18% compared to Q1 of 2024, dropping to 242. The 296 recalls in Q1 were the second highest number of events in the past 5 years. It is not therefore surprising to see a decrease in Q2. Now, in contrast, the number of units impacted rose by 267%, so very large. They went from 53.4 million in Q1 to 196 million in Q2. This is the highest number of units in the past 2 years. The first half of 2024 surpassed the first half of 23 in both recalls and units impacted. There were 538 events in the first half of 2024 compared to 493 in the first half of 2023. There were 149.6 million units recalled in the first half of 23 compared to 249.5 million in the first half of 24. Quality issues was the leading cause of recall activity in the sector. It accounted for 26 events in Q2. Parts concerns was the second most common cause with 24 events. And this was followed closely by device failures with 23 recalls. And then safety issues with 22 recall events. The top 3 recall concerns by volume all impacted syringes. Parts was the leading cause and was tied to 112.4 million defective units. And the majority of these were from a recall of 108 million syringes that were out of range of FDA-approved devices. Expired products was the second most common reason for medical device recalls. It was linked to 3 events, including a single recall of 35.2 million syringes that didn't have an expiration date on the outer packaging. This error caused expired products then to be shipped to consumers. The third highest number of units recalled was 30.9 million due to quality issues. This includes a single recall involving 30.2 million syringes whose testing documentation didn't support accuracy of the products. There were 173 unique companies involved in Q2 recalls. This included 35 companies with between 2 and 4 recall events. 4 companies had between 5 and 9 recall events, and unfortunately, 1 company had 11 recalls. Both the number and volume of Class 1 medical device recalls decreased in Q2. It went from 33 events to 30, and from 19 million units to 1.8 million. Class 2 devices also saw fewer recalls in Q2, dropping to 208 from the 260 we saw in Q1. There were considerably more Class 2 units affected. They went from 34.3 million recalled in Q1 to 159.1 million in Q2, so a spike between Q1 and 2. The change in Class 3 units recalled was more dramatic. There were 47 units impacted in 3 recalls last quarter. There were 35 million units impacted in 4 recalls in Q2, so quite the jump. Matt.
Yeah, so again, before we take questions, we have insights from another set of partners. So we have Sanjita Abraham, Nicholas Benetatos, and Marta Villarraga with Exponent. They said recall processes will need to keep evolving as CDRH continues to strengthen post-market surveillance activities, and the medical device recall program and medical devices continue to increase in complexity. Many medical devices are distributed globally, thus compounding the logistical challenges of recalls. A robust internal recall plan and the ability to engage in mock recalls to confirm systems and team members are ready to execute can strengthen a manufacturer's readiness. This can also provide the opportunity to enhance or modify processes over time to accelerate preparedness for when an actual recall occurs.
Thank you, Matt. So again, good insights from the Exponent team. You can read more within our article. So that we will open it up for questions within the med device industry. I do see a question here. Software used to be a major reason for medical device recalls. Is that still an issue? Yeah, I think absolutely still an issue. I can't remember the exact number of quarters in a row we saw software continue to hit as one of the top categories for recalls. So it may just be an anomaly if it's down slightly, but I do still think it's an issue and one that we're keeping an eye on. We can take a peek at some of the recent data on software, but I do anticipate that continuing to happen, especially in some of these medical devices that are connected. Not only can something go wrong to the patient, but you also have vulnerabilities from bad players as well that can cause recalls. All right, so with that, I think we've got another question here. So what impact do you think the FTC's latest round of warning letters about patents in the FDA's Orange Book will have? Anybody want to take that, Matt?
Okay. I can take that. So I think the simple answer, and maybe not the best answer, is that right now I think it's unclear. So the agency did a round of letters. I believe that went out, I think that was November of 2023, so almost a year ago. And I know that there were several manufacturers who delisted some of their patents, but the majority of the companies I know, they recertified and then maintained their patent listings. So manufacturers, I believe their claim was that their patents had met the statutory listing criteria and that they were in fact required to be listed. So again, I think simple answer, it's still unclear right now.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. So in the interest of time, I think we only got about 10 minutes. We are going to keep moving on. So Amy?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have reached our last industry, pharmaceuticals. Here's our question. In April, several advocacy groups sued the FDA, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Center for Tobacco Products. They are fighting to get the FDA to finalize a proposed ruling banning menthol as a flavor in cigarettes. According to one plaintiff, what year did the FDA officials begin discussing the need to quickly address the dangers of menthol cigarettes on public health? Is it A, 2020, B, 2014, or C, 2009? Go ahead and make your picks.
Thanks, Amy. I will say I actually thought when I was reading through this that menthol cigarettes were off the market already, but I guess yeah, maybe I was wrong. So I think we'll just give a few more seconds here for people to select their answer as well. All right, so we'll dive into our pharmaceutical. So the second quarter of 2024 brought more changes for the pharma industry. The U.S. Department of Justice, or DOJ, and the Biden-Harris administration are moving ahead to reschedule marijuana from a highly controlled Schedule I drug to a Schedule III drug. And this would put it in the same category as some forms of codeine, anabolic steroids, and testosterone. In its notice of proposed rulemaking, the DOJ notes that several states have their own laws around marijuana, and legislation in those states has created a multi-billion-dollar industry. The agency is soliciting comments on the possible impact rescheduling would have on federal taxes and investment in the pharma industry, research and development, and that's among other concerns. While regulations may be easing for marijuana, the FDA does continue to deny a regulatory path forward for other products derived from cannabis, specifically CBD. The agency says the current approval mechanism for food and dietary supplements does not consider the risks associated with CBD. Changes in the next farm bill may also have an impact on hemp producers because some forms of CBD can be derived from hemp. In addition, advocacy groups are calling for a ban on menthol cigarettes, which alludes to our question, claiming the FDA is taking too long to implement its rule that has been under discussion for more than 10 years. We mentioned the lawsuit again within this opening question. So also regulators are working to manage the increasing use of biosimilar medical products to treat conditions such as diabetes, arthritis, cancer, and Crohn's disease. The FDA released a new guidance on promotional communications around these products to ensure truth and transparency in advertising. Developing new drugs efficiently is always important to ensure safe products are available to patients quickly. The Center for Drug Evaluation and Research announced its new Center for Clinical Trial Innovation to enhance communication and collaboration regarding clinical trials. The center will also help researchers stay current with innovations, improve the effectiveness of clinical trials, and increase the participation of diverse populations. Amy.
All right, let's see how everyone did on the pharmaceutical question, and then we'll take a look at the data. In April, several advocacy groups sued the FDA, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Center for Tobacco Products. They are fighting to get the FDA to finalize a proposed rule banning menthol as a flavor in cigarettes. According to one of the plaintiffs, what year did FDA officials begin discussing the need to quickly address the dangers of menthol cigarettes on public health? So Chris, I think like you, probably most of us thought that it had already been addressed, but the correct answer is C, 2009. This is the year the agency banned all flavored cigarettes except for menthol. Now we'll take a look at the numbers. Matt, you want to walk us through those?
Absolutely. So the number of units impacted in FDA pharmaceutical recalls fell by about 51%, from 9.3 million in Q1 to about 4.5 million in Q2. There have only been 6 other quarters since Q1 of 2005, with fewer units recalled. The number of events was also lower. It dropped from 112 recalls in Q1 to 93 events in Q2. The average recall size decreased as well. It fell to about 49,000 units compared to 83,000 in Q1. That's the 4th smallest average since Q1 of 2005. There wasn't a single recall with more than 1 million units, and only 13 had more than 100,000 units. The first half of 2024 also had fewer recalls and units impacted compared to the first half of 2023. There were 279 pharmaceutical recalls impacting about 74 million units in the first half of 2023, whereas in the first half of 2024, there were 205 events that affected about 14 million units. So big difference there. Failed specifications was the leading cause of pharmaceutical recalls with 21 events. Sterility was the second most common concern in Q2, and it was linked to 15. Foreign materials was third, and it was tied to 11 recalls this quarter. Sterility issues impacted the most units by volume with about 1.7 million. GMP deviations was second with about 1.1 million units recalled, and failed specifications affected about 570,000 units, making it the third most common reason by volume for recalls in the sector. The number and volume of Class 1 recalls fell in Q2. There were 12 events that impacted about 46,000 units. Class 2 recalls dropped from 83 in Q1 to 64 in Q2. The number of units affected increased to 4.1 million compared to 3.8 million last quarter. The number of Class 3 units impacted also rose in Q2, as did the number of recalls. There were 17 Class 3 events this quarter compared to 8 last quarter. There were 62 unique companies linked to the Q2 recalls. Of those companies, 20 companies had been between 2 and 4 recalls, with only 1 company having more than 5 recalls. That company actually had 7 events that impacted about 510,000 units. The recalls were primarily for lack of sterility. Those of potency and being out of specification were also cited in some of the recalls. Chris?
Thank you, Matt. So before we take questions in the pharma industry, we want to share some insights from our partner, Kate Hardy, who's a partner with Kirkland and Ellis. A little quote from her article: "The true number of compounded drugs with significant safety issues may be far greater than the number of reported due to the vast increase in the number of these products, especially compounded injectable GLP-1 products, with the significant differences in manufacturing, product surveillance, and adverse event reporting requirements. The number of compounded products that potentially present patient safety risk or should be recalled is unknown. Considering the sterility and manufacturing issues that led to the OTC product recalls, it will be important to monitor ongoing consumer complaints or other product safety signals for compounded sterile products such as GLP-1s." So great insight there from Kate. You can read more again within our article. With that, we can try to take one question or so related to the pharmaceutical industry. We'll peek real quick. I do see a question about, are more recalls from American-made or foreign-made product? I think it depends on the industry. And we don't always have data on kind of the necessary root cause of what generated the issue. I can tell you, like the FDA and pharmaceuticals, there is a continued focus and emphasis on foreign suppliers. Something I think companies and brands should be very focused on themselves is auditing and vetting foreign suppliers, especially through supply chain shortages, labor shortages, et cetera, to make sure that their contracts are up to date and they're getting what they're paying for as well, because it has led to a number of different recalls from what I can see. We'll see if we can dig up more data related to that. Unfortunately, we are about a minute till we have to end, so I think we'll close here. We'll try to address more questions offline. So with that, that's the overview for our second quarter of the Recall Index. We do hope you gained some new perspectives today and you're leaving with some new things to consider. The full Q2 report has more from our partners who you heard from during these sessions, some of those quotes. We'll also provide additional information on the trends we discussed in the presentation in a preview of the July recall numbers. The final recall index does have some other topics that we couldn't fit in today's webinar, and that's information that's exclusive to Sedgwick.
So we know we gave you a lot of information today. We will be emailing out a full digital version of this recall index as a follow-up to today's discussion. We'll use the email address that you used to register for the webinar, so please check your inbox. If for some reason you don't receive it by tomorrow, let us know and we'll be happy to get a copy out to you.
Also, as a reminder, the webinar for the European edition of the Recall Index is tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. So if you want to know what is on the minds of regulators in the European Union and United Kingdom, please join our colleagues and get more information about the data and trends there. You can scan the QR code that's on the screen or use the short URL. Remember, the URL is case sensitive. We'll also include a link within the post-event email that will be sent to your inbox following the session. Alternatively, you can also add a note in the chat panel and we'll get the details over to you. After all of that, if you still want even more data and trends, keep an eye out for the premier edition of our Australian index. We'll be releasing that in the next few weeks. So we are out of time for any additional questions, but if you do prefer to talk to Amy, Chris, or myself directly, you can reach out to us through the contact details that are on your screen now. We'd be more than happy to schedule some time to talk. You can also send us any questions or comments on today's session and the format. Is there anything you'd like to see in future webinars or suggestions on how to improve these? Again, thank you so much for your time today and hope everyone enjoyed.
Yep, thank you as well. I do want to say a special thanks for Amy for joining Matt and I on this webinar. Great job, Amy. And then a special thanks to Luke Shires and Matt Gigg, who make this all possible with the data and the development of the webinar behind the scenes. So thank you to both of you. But again, as Matt said, thank you for joining us. We'll take a look at your additional questions and try to address those offline. And we'll see you again next quarter. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.